Shabbat Shalom. We are now going to discuss the weekly reading of the Torah, Bo, which means come to Pharaoh and say to him the following. We are in the middle of the plagues, and as you can see, I'm wearing paraphernalia which many of you maybe have never seen before, and these are called the phylacteries. And the phylacteries are to be found at the end of this weekly Torah reading in chapter 13 of Exodus. Now, for those of you who are Christians, you can find a reference to the phylacteries and the prayer shawl in Matthew 23, verse 5. And indeed, Jesus did put these paraphernalia on. They are very, very special. I learned about this actually in seminary, Jewish Theological Seminary, 21 years ago, because indeed in the New Testament we have proof, external proof, outside of the rabbinic canonical writings, that the phylacteries indeed were in use 2,000 years ago. And we have also found archaeological specimens of the phylacteries in Mount Sinai. Not in Mount Sinai, excuse me, in Masada. Masada was a fortress which, instead of surrendering to the Romans, Masada, the soldiers, the 900 defenders of Masada committed suicide. They took lots and they slit their own throats rather than to see their wives and children carried off into the degradation of slavery in Rome. And Yigai Eliadin, who was a great general and a great leader in Israel, found a pair, archaeologically exactly the same pair of phylacteries in Masada. I believe also, I heard that in Kibbutz Beit Alpha, they also found a 2,000-year-old set of phylacteries. And one of the reasons that we learned about this in seminary from the New Testament was that a German theologian by the name of Wellhausen claimed that the phylacteries were a later time invention by the Jewish rabbis a few hundred years ago. But the truth is that, and we have the proof also from the New Testament, from the book of Matthew, also from archaeological proofs, that the phylacteries were indeed in use 2,000 years ago. When I was in seminary, I asked my teachers, how far back did the phylacteries actually go? And they said all the way back to the giving of the law in Mount Sinai. But in this week's Torah reading, we see something very different. We are not yet at Sinai. We are still in our homes in Egypt. We are still in slavery in Egypt. And what we read in last week's reading, Va'era, is that God is sending Moses to Pharaoh to confront Pharaoh. And God gives otot. Otot means signs. Otot moftim. Moftim are also wonders. And God gives Moses signs and wonders. And he says, go to Pharaoh and give Pharaoh signs and wonders. And go to the elders of Israel and give them signs and wonders. And then go to the people of Israel and give them signs. And these phylacteries are a sign. They are an ot, a sign. A very important word in the history and in the religion of Judaism. These phylacteries, as you can see, I have it on my hand and I have it on my forehead. These are not used actually on the Sabbath. But the history of the phylacteries starts in Exodus 13. Even before we left our homes, we were ready to leave our homes with our matzah bread for Passover. We were ready to leave with our canes, our walking canes. Everything was ready to flee from Egypt and go across the Red Sea and into Arabia. And one of the things I wanted to share, and I'm not saying this, please forgive me, I'm not being boastful about this, but I am unique in what I'm saying. I believe that this cube is a representation, a replica of that black stone in what is today Mecca, and that Jethro and Moses served God in their pre-Judaic way at that time. And the Hajj of today basically was in effect thousands of years ago, and that Moses was taking the Israelites out of the pyramid system of slavery to the cubic system of freedom in the desert. And Moses indeed says to Pharaoh, 3 days in the desert. 3 days is the Hajj. If you look at the Islamic tradition of the Hajj in Mecca, going around the black stone, doing the full Hajj is 3 days. And We have indeed later something called the menorah. Menorah has 7 branches of the candelabra. We're going to read about this later in Exodus 25. We wrap around our arm 7 times. The menorah is 7 branches. One of the names of the city of Medina is Yathrib, which is Jethro. Another name is Minawara. Minawara means lightened up. Now, Minawara is the same word as menorah. And indeed, my dear friends, Jim and Penny Caldwell, have found many, many examples of menorahs, 7-branch candelabras etched into the stones of the Arabian desert. They found sandal markings. We're going to talk about this in future Torah readings, God willing. But what I wanted to share specifically here is that these phylacteries, which you see here, what we do is we entwine ourselves with God. We wrap ourselves up with God, and we write God's name. This is Shin. Shin is the first letter of God's name. Dalet is the second letter, and Yud is the third letter, Shaddai. El Shaddai means God, the all-provider. But what does the word Shaddai mean? Shaddai is the plural of Shad. Shad means a breast. And so basically God is a multi-breasted God feeding all his children. And so we have God's name, El Shaddai, here. We have the 7 branches of the candelabra. And all of this is inside. If you open up the sutures and you open up this cubic, this is all made of leather, you will find 4 pouches. 2 of the pouches are what we are reading this Shabbat, Exodus 13, about the signs, the phylacteries, and on the frontlets between the eyes, and a sign on the arm. And then we read it again in Deuteronomy 6 with the Hero Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, which everyone knows. And Deuteronomy 11, which also talks about the phylacteries. The phylacteries are mentioned 4 times in the Torah. Twice in Exodus 13 this week, and then Deuteronomy 6, Deuteronomy 11, and for Christians, you find it in Matthew 23, verse 5. So this is a very interesting teaching, I believe. It brings the Jews and the Christians especially together. I would even say some Muslims who might watch this might feel very, very drawn to the Jews and the Christians because of the similarity between the cubic form. Don't forget the cubic stone in the desert was our freedom, and the triangular pyramid was the symbol of slavery in Egypt. These are things which I share when people ask me to teach it. It's in my 6th book, Return to Mecca. And what I will be doing over the coming weeks is to show how the Israelites indeed did spend 40 years in the desert, most of it in the Arabian desert, about 38 years in the Arabian desert. And even especially in the Arabian desert, including Mount Sinai, there are many, many signs and wonders which we will be reviewing in the future. I also wanted to add one last thing, that Jethro indeed was buried where? Jethro was buried in Israel. Jethro was buried just to the west of Tiberias. Jethro is the forefather of the Druze people. Druze are our cousins also, just like Arabs are our cousins. And they received an inheritance in the land. How do I know this? Josephus writes about it. And if you come to Israel, God willing, with Lipkin Tours, we will take you up to the tomb of Nebi Shuaib. Nebi Shuaib is Jethro. He is the greatest prophet in the eyes of the Druze people, who are our cousins, who also serve in our army, and they're very active in all forms of Israeli life. So, Shabbat Shalom to everyone. Mazaya.